Right now in Fox, Carolina, one of the last counties in South Carolina that doesn't allow Sunday alcohol sales everywhere is leaving the decision up to voters this election day. Voters in Pickens County will find two questions on the issue when they head to the ballot box this election.
Fox Carolina's Zach Proletsky tells us what neighbors in the county will decide next Tuesday.
It's a topic that is brewing in Pickens County. Should the sale of alcohol on Sundays be allowed?
Pickens County is one of 8 counties across South Carolina that does not allow Sunday alcohol sales. However, it is allowed in 4 cities: Central, Clemson, Easley, and Pickens, but nowhere else.
My husband drives all the way to Clemson some Sundays just to get beer for the football game or just for us doing like a little football party at our house.
In May, Pickens County Council passed an ordinance to put 2 referendums on the November ballot. One to allow beer and wine sales on Sundays at stores, and one to allow restaurants to serve alcohol on Sundays in places where that is currently not allowed.
Some people, they come here, and when they knew we do not sell alcohol, they leave it. They don't need it here.
In the town of Liberty, Sunday sales are not permitted. I spoke with several people who live in the town. Many were in favor or indifferent about the change, saying if they can drive just a few miles away to get alcohol on Sundays, why not where they live as well?
It would bring a lot more revenue into town if we could just get it here instead of having to use extra to go somewhere else.
Some I also spoke with were opposed, citing religious reasons and previous experiences with alcoholism as a reason why things don't need to change. The debate in the hands of the voters. In Pickens County, Zach Proletsky for Fox Carolina News.
As a reminder, you have until 7 o'clock in South Carolina to cast your vote on Election Day. Polls also close at 7 in Georgia, 7:30 in North Carolina.
President